So we are very happy to welcome for this session Antoine Bon, who is legal advisor in privacy and data protection at the Belgium Data Protection Authority, Frank Ingerith, Director of Monitoring and Auditing Legal Affairs at Europe, Fabrizio Venturelli, Senior Director and Global DPO at Workday, and Aukesh Aria, Regulatory Compliance and Business Privacy Leader at IBM. So this group will be basically discussing how GDPR provisions have been materialized over time through the EU Cloud CoC, the main challenges encountered throughout its developments, and also exploring the potential of post-approval outcomes. So let's begin, and for that, I would like to invite Antoine from the Belgian DPA, as I mentioned already, to initiate our discussion. Hi, Antoine.
Hi, Gabriela. Can you hear me well?
Yes, I can.
All right. Thanks for having me. So just I want to make a couple of points, and the first one would be that obviously it's a great achievement because as I was saying to my fellow panelists before, the process concludes 3 years of back and forth between the Belgian SA, Scope Europe, and the members of the code, but also a dialogue with all the members of the EDPB. And that's the first thing I wanted to stress, is that it's a fantastic achievement also for the EDPB, for its members, but also for the EDPB Secretariat, because I mean it really shows that the mechanism and consistency work and can deliver and can produce awesome results. So that's something I wanted to insist on. Another thing I wanted to say also is that throughout the process, I think Aukesh, Frank, and Fabrizio know that we've had many meetings, many emails exchanged, many lengthy discussions. But overall, the work was always about the substance, the content, and the wording, the rules, the procedures. So what I want to convey is that it was really an interesting process, because I mean it really allowed, I think, both the Belgian DPA as well as the sector to learn about each other's expectations as well as constraints. I think at the Belgian DPA, I mean we've learned about so many things about the cloud environment, also the constraints. So it really helped us to gain expertise in that area. So that's the first thing I wanted to convey. It's a great achievement. The second thing I wanted to say is that it is definitely something to celebrate, the approval as well as the accreditation of the monitoring body. But it's in a way it's only the beginning. It's the beginning of something new that starts, which is a dialogue and a collaboration with the monitoring body. The first thing we've done to concretize that is to basically set up a channel of communication between the newly accredited monitoring body and the Belgian DPA. So it seems pretty basic, but it's basically how we're gonna communicate. And I think it's important perhaps to explain a bit what kind of communication, what kind of exchange there will be. The first thing is that you have, I would say, formal communication, mandatory communication. So you have the annual report that the monitoring body must send on an annual basis to the Belgian DPA, and basically which says what the monitoring body has done during the previous year. You also have more frequent notifications in certain cases. For example, if the monitoring body takes a sanction against a member, some of these sanctions must be transmitted to the Belgian DPA. Same thing in case some complaints are not resolved. But I hope that also we can develop some form of informal communication, because I think that's really also the aim of a code of conduct, is to develop a platform, a safe space in which the sector as well as the regulator can really have a constructive dialogue. And I hope that if we have questions on certain specific aspects of the cloud sector, we can go to Scope, who can answer through its own knowledge and experience, or go to the members and basically kind of raise the issue. And also goes the other way. If there's a problem in the sector, a question, I hope that this channel can also be used to start an informal dialogue. Another thing I wanted to stress also, and that's quite important, is that obviously we see the monitoring body as a partner to foster compliance, but we'll also be assessing the work of the monitoring body. And since it's the first, we have to put a certain number of procedures in place, basically to see how it will work, and that remains to be implemented. But within the coming month, years, there will be regular assessment of the work. So we'll see how the monitoring body basically carries out its role, how it monitors the company, how it handles complaints, if it takes sanction, if the sanctions are appropriate, if needed. So that will be also our role in the coming month. Yeah, now that the code is out, obviously we hope that the Belgian DPA will really put itself as a country that promotes those code. Obviously, we think that we have a very strategic position, being in Belgium, in Brussels, the seat of so many federations, and where so many organizations representing sectors are established. We really want to put ourselves as a regulator that promotes code of conduct. And we obviously hope that this will be the first of many transnational code in the future. Last thing I wanted to say also is to give certain tips about really what made this project a success. I think it's important. Nobody's going to be surprised. I mean, they're pretty basic, but still, I think it's important to mention them. The first thing I wanted to say is that I want to really emphasize that it takes persistence to get through the procedure, and that's what we really had. We had persistence from all stakeholders. I think we can say that at certain points we all were a bit discouraged and tired of the process, but obviously it was worth it. The second thing I want to say is that what was great is that Scope Europe and its members really arrived prepared. The first version of the code, the control catalogs, the monitoring body from the start were an excellent basis to start working on. And the last thing, and I'm going to leave the floor to, I think, Alkesh after, is that we had the chance to work with tremendous professionals, Alkesh, Fabrizio, Frank, and many others, and not only competent in their field, but also very nice to work with. And so I think that was the real recipe for success. And I'll end here and leave the floor to I think Frank or Alkesh, if I'm not wrong. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Antoine. And in fact, I mean, on behalf of Scope Europe, thank you very much for your hard work. It has been crucial. David has mentioned himself during the general session. And indeed, you spoke about the importance of having a fruitful dialogue between the industry and the regulator. And you were a key element behind the success of this initiative. So thank you. And also since you talked about the next steps for the monitoring body and this exchange between the regulator and the monitoring body, I think nobody better To talk about that, our Director of Monitoring and Auditing, who has been very, very deeply involved in this whole process and the accreditation process and can give you a great overview of everything. Frank, the floor is yours. We cannot hear you, Frank.
Double muted. Thank you. So
Yes.
thank you first of all, Gabriela, for this kind introduction, and also congratulations first of all to this great achievement as of today. But it has been mentioned very often, the General Assembly members did have to have patience and perseverance, but I would also like to highlight, and Antoine mentioned that already, it wasn't just the members and the industry that needed to be persistent and patient in that time. It was also the authorities, and especially Antoine, who needed to have some patience with us, especially when we weren't as patient anymore and tried to get things done a bit quicker. But we also totally agree, and that's something we really appreciate. The mechanisms within the EDPB have been working out in the end. So what it means, for sure, it was the first code of conduct, or one of the first code of conduct that has been discussed within the EDPB. And certainly the mechanisms as provided by GDPR was slightly adapted to what was already existent under the directive. And by that, also the material requirements under GDPR has slightly shifted. So it was kind of obvious that it needs some time, that the authorities will have to set their ground and understanding of what they will be expecting. And giving that into all this kind of recipe, I think it has taken its time, but it has taken its time worthily. And it was it was worth all the efforts taken. What I would like to stress out, and Antoine sometimes already mentioned stuff that I would like to have to point it out, but next to the approval of the code, I would like to give some more emphasis on the monitoring concept, on the monitoring background, and what that in regards of the EU Cloud Code of Conduct. And in that regard, let me shortly introduce some basics in there. GDPR provides that codes of conduct needs to be monitored by an independent monitoring body, and this monitoring body needs to be accredited, and this accreditation certainly follows certain rules, which also are aligned within the EDPB in the consistency mechanisms, and therefore we as a monitoring body do have to meet the criteria as set out by Article 41 by the subsequent guidelines of the EDPB, plus the subsequent national criteria as of Belgium. And all that needed to be translated into internal procedures. That took some efforts, and I think I'm not lying if I was saying I think the internal procedures of our monitoring body are in total exceeding the amount of number of pages as the code and the controls catalog comprises of. So you might imagine it's not the easiest task to do, but in that regard, we were very happy that the Belgian authority also accepted the specific approach that Scope Europe is trying to take, because Scope Europe, and Jörn Wittmann was mentioned that already in this morning sessions, has been established explicitly to monitor codes of conduct, and therefore we wanted to have procedures in place that can be at scale. GDPR provides that an accreditation is only valid for one specific code of conduct, and that's so also with the current accreditation of Scope Europe. But we wanted to make sure that the procedures that we're now drafting can be translated to any other codes of conduct as easy as possible. And having a constructive and cooperative dialogue with the Belgian authority was very helpful in that regard, because by that we're now also prepared to get in touch with other codes of conduct and make use of all the experience in that regard, also valuable to those other codes of conduct. And in that regard, what's required as a monitoring body? It's required, first of all, a lot of internal procedures and a lot of, let's say, straightforward policies and safeguards. It's required that the monitoring body is independent, that covers the contractual perspectives, the corporate perspectives, the financial perspectives, so it needs to be financially sustainable, but also the material perspectives. So meaning the monitoring body does have to have its own expertise and doesn't need to rely on third parties that then always intervene to provide sufficient knowledge to the monitoring body. And last but not least, and that's something we are also very looking forward in the next months, that's the transparency and communication requirements. So a lot of matters that we're doing are needed to be transparent, and that's, for example, why every adherence services are published on the EU Cloud CoC's website in the list of adherent services. There is the complaints mechanism that everybody can access over this website, but also certain matters that will happen behind the doors just within our monitoring body needs to be communicated to the authority. And Antoine mentioned some examples of that. For example, whenever we impose a sanction against any member, or if there are material changes to our procedures, or for example, to the code of conduct itself. So that's the overarching mechanism that's in there. And I already mentioned that we wanted to have this kind of setup at scale because we think the independent structure is a trust booster under GDPR. Monitoring bodies are subject to very severe scrutiny of the authorities, and in the end, we might be subject to 10 million euros of administrative fines ourselves. So believe me, we don't want to be there. We want to do a proper job because the other options are not worth taking the path and not even worth trying not worth even trying. So that means we really consider that to be a trusted environment. And that means, especially for SMEs, and that was also mentioned, I think, in the last session, SMEs want to have, when they're onboarding cloud service providers, a sufficient level of guarantees that everything is okay from a GDPR's perspective. And having this code of conduct in place allows those SMEs to rely on this code of conduct and its framework by onboarding, because especially SMEs often do lack their internal resources to perform all the complexities of assessments. And GDPR is a matter of complexity by itself. But if you then have to translate it also to the cloud environment, which we already learned throughout this day, is evolving every single day and is very complex within its interference of different layers and so on. Principally, SMEs don't want to take care of that one. They simply want to concentrate on their business. And I think they should be able to focus on their business instead of focusing on too much bureaucracy regarding GDPR, provided a trusted framework is in place. And having said that, I would like to give some insights on practical experience on the declarations of adherences and the different levels of compliance that we have. So first of all, and that was mentioned already today, the code provides 3 different levels of compliance. All of those levels of compliance require that the company has to be compliant with every single requirement of the code. So the only difference is the level of evidence that's being provided, meaning the first is that the monitoring by itself is verifying the CSP's adherence. Level 2 means that a significant share of controls is underpinned by third-party certifications and standards. And level 3 requires that 100% of the requirements isn't just assessed by the monitoring body, but is additionally underpinned by third-party certifications and audit reports. And that means this third level of compliance, which I'm very happy to announce that we already have one company that reached that level, which is Fabersoft, is going far beyond the legal requirements. The legal requirements, as of the guidelines for codes of conduct, only requires the monitoring body to perform those assessments. But we considered, especially to make it accessible for SMEs, to have these 3 layers. So the first level is very accessible for SMEs, but the highest level is then a possibility for companies that are in a high-risk environment or that simply want to go the extra mile in providing evidence and providing confidence to their customers. And that's why we consider these levels very helpful in practice. And in practice, we also recognized when we are assessing these CSPs that the mechanisms are very effective. At the moment, we are very often first trying to understand the CSP's cloud services, and there's a lot of back and forth. And sometimes the back and forth uncovers certain matters that weren't, let's say, implemented consistently within the CSPs. Not for bad faith, but simply, as I just mentioned, cloud services are evolving on a day-by-day business, and some companies have their procedures for several years. And if you sometimes update a procedure on the right-hand side of your company, that might create an inconsistency on the left-hand side of your company. And that kind of mechanism helps unfold this, and by that also helps the companies to make their procedures more consistent and in the end provide their businesses not just more efficiently, but also more compliant with GDPR, not saying they haven't been before. It's just a matter of consistency and long-term safeguards. And that's why we're, so to say, focusing on procedures and frameworks, because we want to make sure that companies aren't just compliant at one moment in time, but that they have procedures to stay compliant with the code continuously the very moment that they have passed our assessment. And I think that should be, for now, everything I have to say, especially taking into account the time.
Thank you for the great overview, Frank. So now, after listening to the inputs from representatives of the Belgium DPA and the monitoring body, I'm happy to invite the industry representatives. I think we can start off with Fabrizio, who can also give us an overview of Workday's path towards adherence to the code, which is quite interesting. And yes, Fabrizio.
Yeah, thank you. Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation today, and thanks to everyone here. It's really nice to be here the day after of the code approval with Frank, Antoine, Alkesh, and many others that spoke earlier and are going to speak later. I was saying before in our preparation, but it doesn't happen so often to talk right after such an event, and on something as Workday we've been working on for, I think, 4 years, many companies even longer. And it's a really nice feeling, let's say, to be proud of. And I'm thanking Frank as Scope Europe as a whole. Bon Antoine, we worked a lot with them. I think it's probably the authority we worked the best with. It was really a fluid conversation, impressive know-how on single small clauses, small details, and Alkesh and IBM in general for supporting the entire effort, and especially the control catalog, I have to say, as a highlight. I mean, second, I'm just introducing myself, and Workday DPO. Workday is a global company providing cloud services in the finance and HR. So having certifications or adherence or seals for our cloud service, it's extremely important. Years ago, even before I've joined Workday, we embraced and we achieved the SOC 1, SOC 2, ISO certification, G Cloud to sell services in the UK. But as of now, there was nothing like a publicly approved code directly coming down from the GDPR, and that was the code of conduct. My manager, Barbara Cosgrove, who spoke this morning, she joined, I think, more or less 4 years ago, the General Assembly. And she bet on the right horse. So because eventually it was approved yesterday, and we worked a lot on it. And I think I'd say the added value of the entire exercise for me has been to be involved as a company in the entire drafting process. So it's not something that comes down from the top to the bottom, let's say, like a GDPR or an EU regulation. It's something that was co-created. I've heard these words this morning from the head of the Belgian authority, Stevens, which is actually probably the best word, a co-creation process. But I think Alkesh is going to spend more words on this topic later. First thing I want to say then, to go actually in the middle of my, my presentation today, is the added value of having a monitoring body from our perspective as CSP. Well, it's definitely, for us, the most important thing is that it's the extension, the natural extension, the longa mano of the authorities in Europe. And there is no such a thing in nature as of now. And that's why years ago, I think 3 years ago, we achieved as first company the adherence to the code before it was approved. It was still a draft. And then we got it again last year, and we're going through the process in these days for the third time, but now with actually an approved code. So even before it was approved for us, it was really, really important to find and to see a monitoring body that was an extension of the Belgian DPA, at the same time really business oriented, in meaning they understood the processes, they had just even the time, the know-how and the resources to be really close to our processes. And authorities have to oversee an entire state, and there are only 27 authorities in Europe, 26. And but there is, monitoring bodies can be much more granular in their operations, and that's, I think, the big added value for us, and to have this constant dialogue. I mean, to me, the face of the monitoring body is always Frank, but there is a lot background and back office work there. And that's this sort of fluid interaction. It has, for me, it's impossible to estimate. It's great. The second thing I'd like to highlight is how we got there to the adherence, and it's strictly connected to the fact to the role of the monitoring body, of course. And it's strictly connected as well with this co-creation process, because of course we had the advantage, like many other companies that were in the General Assembly, that we co-drafted it, we co-created it, and there was a constant feedback back and forth, as Antoine said. A lot of meetings happened in these 3 years, so that was the advantage. We were familiar with the provisions. At the same time, we were literally the first company going through it. And at least when we started, we were the first company. And it has been an interesting journey. The first thing we have done to provide like a couple of really examples was to work together with the compliance department. Fortunately, at Workday, we are basically part of the same organization, compliance and privacy. So the first exercise was a sort of mapping exercise with whatever certification we had in-house and also policies we had in-house. So definitely, because we touched before about levels 1, 2, and 3, what helped us was that a lot of controls in the code were already audited and verified by third parties. For example, for the SOC and SOC 1, SOC 2, ISO certification 2718, that helps a lot. If I can give a hint to any company, definitely for the medium big, the small ones, I guess it's more about policies and procedures and paperwork they may have already in-house, is go through all the certifications as well, even before going to scope if you want, because it helps a lot the process. And it helps us. I think it helps the monitoring body. It would even help an authority one day, because there are like more layers of let's say attestations. There are many, and just to give a really basic example, many certifications ask to have a privacy point of contact, or some of them specify DPO. And this is also the case in the code of conduct. So if you have that verified already somewhere in the SOC, in the ISO, or in an EMIT assessment performed by one of the consultancy companies out there, it's gonna maybe easier to demonstrate that one day you actually applied for the declaration of adherence, because you have it attested already by third parties, for an ISO, for a SOC, for an EMIT certification, for a NIST certification, just to make some examples without promoting any of those. So that was the path toward adherence. It takes, by the code, around 3 months, I'd say 11 weeks, 12 weeks, and it's usually doable if you have already the evidences done even earlier. And to give even more examples, and I'm not going to go even more granular, usually the CSP has 2 weeks to respond, and usually the monitoring body has 1 month to respond. So taking that in consideration, you get up to 3 months of process. From our end, we were able usually to conclude it earlier. And again, the process is really smooth, and at the same time, really thorough, really thorough, and from the Scopes Europe end. But it's also in a really good way, again, because both we know the code because we co-created. Companies may feel a sort of familiarity with the code, even if it's the first time you read it, more than even with other certification standards, I'd say, from my experience, because it has this co-creation factor that many other certifications lack. And again, the process of adherence, it's really interesting, and it's definitely a growth experience also for the company. The first thing it forced us to do was to remap anything that we had in-house against the code for the adherence. But secondly, it's also an ongoing exercise, because even now, even when we are off this adherence cycle, let's say, which for us usually we usually have to achieve the certification to maintain it in August. So let's say even in October, if we have to change a policy or a procedure, that it's in the scope of the code, we have to keep in mind that we may change some control. We may have to change some internal controls to still be able to map it against the code. So it forces you to go through this. It forces you to keep that in mind, and not less than that other different certification, but with the added value that this one is actually has this GDPR seal now from yesterday, which is a great added value. And just to conclude, I think that the two most important things for us to have achieved the code in the past, and hopefully crossing the fingers in a couple of months to get the declaration of adherence again for the third time, is first of all, it forces us to keep up with requirements, because again, it's not only the adherence exercise, but the monitoring body may ask us for clarification. It happened in the past that they had a couple of tabs off the cycle, and we had still to go through the portal, the formal process, to provide answers, which is absolutely right. And at the same time, it opens this door, this filter door with the authority, which is great. They can leverage scope, we can leverage them as well. They can be, let's say, the missing link in between. The second important thing, and I would probably put it at the same level, it's a seal of reassurance for our customers. As of now, we had to go, every time we had to provide indirect answers to direct questions. So how many times CSP have heard the question, are you GDPR compliant? Which is the $1 million or $1 billion question. It's really hard to demonstrate. I mean, I'm pretty confident Workday ticks all the boxes. We could provide SOC, ISO, again, policies, audits, and any type of evidence. But having a code like this, that for Workday at least, that basically has 100% of its services in the cloud, it's really important, because it's something that doesn't have any comparison with other certification, but because it has got the blessing from authorities, from the DPB in particular, and from the Belgian DPA, and it goes through an accredited monitoring body. So there is nothing like it on the market. It's the closest answer a company could give when you are asked, are you compliant with GDPR, to provide the declaration of adherence to the code of conduct. And again, it's not only privacy, but there is an entire section, I think Alkesh is going to touch on it, about security controls. So, which is again another massive topic that sometimes opens up Pandora's box when we talk about GDPR. That is also really well covered in the code. I think that was, pretty much it from my end. I could talk for hours. Again, we've been working on it for so many years. So I'm trying just to restrain myself not to talk more, but I'm looking forward for the next part with Alkesh, I think.
Thank you, Fabrizio. I haven't got as much to say as yourself, but hopefully I'll sort of try and cover everything that was possible. Hopefully you guys can hear me. Is that everything? Can you hear me first of all? Oh, brilliant. Thank you. Okay. Just want to start here first. The first thing here is it's been a very long journey, but it's everyone's hard work. There's so much come to fruition. And I really want to thank everybody and congratulations to everybody as well. I also wanted to echo what my fellow panelists have said. It's been a pleasure working with everybody. You know, it's just been an amazing journey. We've had so many meetings. We've, you know, the number of phone calls we've had every week, and I probably spent one day a week on this for the last quite a few years now. So it's great that we've got this, and it's amazing we got this far. So I'll just quickly talk about IBM quickly. So you know, similar to other members in this code, IBM is also very committed, you know, to protecting our data, customers' data, and to demonstrate, you know, compliance to the GDPR. We were one of the founding members of this, probably 2012, whenever I think the dates were discussed before, and we were the first company to submit adherence to the EU Cloud Code of Conduct, but that was the pre-GDPR version. It was on the Data Protection Directive. So where I want to start with this is, I wanted to start discussing my personal engagement with the EU Cloud Code of Conduct, because I think, you know, throughout the journey, it's been, like I said, it's been quite an experience. So I got involved in this initiative probably around 2016, 2017, when I first met Scope Europe. They came to IBM's London offices, where they were coming to assess and verify the submission of adherence we'd done to the Code of Conduct at that time. you know, we sort of hit it off, and then at that time, I didn't realize how much time I would spend on the initiative, but GDPR was coming fast within the following year in 2018. And so we formed a task force around sort of early 2017. And this was done with Scope Europe and the General Assembly of the EU Cloud Code of Conduct. It was done to update the GDPR, sorry, it was done to reflect the GDPR, to update it from the Data Protection Directive. I volunteered thinking it might be an easy, simple task, but I couldn't have been more wrong. I will spend the next 4 or 5 years on this project, which I don't regret. Looking back, it was very challenging. What I found was it was a great learning curve exchange, especially with like-minded experts like yourselves on the panel and everybody else that we've been working with. It was just an amazing experience because you learn something daily from you guys, and then like I said, there was no heated arguments, or there was no other debates like that, but people had a lot of opinions to sort of give to this, and they were just very clever people. Well, that's what I could say. So the task force, you know, like I said, I spent a long time on it, but generally we spent probably 3-4 hours a week on this over 3-4 years at least on developing the code. Initially around, first of all, building trust between all our members. And then we debated line by line every single provision of the code. And we also debated line by line at least 20 times, but one single paragraph. I mean, Frank will know this, you know, the rest of you guys have been in this for a long time. It took a long time, but we all came to a common position, and you know, we had the right privacy experts, we had everybody, the right people in the field, with the DPA supporting us. We had experts externally as well. So what we did was we got the right balance between our obligations for the GDPR and what the regulators wanted, and always trying to set the highest bar. One thing also I wanted to make sure, you know, everything that we kind of shared, the ideas we shared, is all reflected in the code, and that's what makes it a very good data protection market for standard for cloud services. So I wanted to continue around IBM now. So and its portfolio. So we have a very large. So you know, IBM's a huge big company with a large presence in Europe and also, and globally. We were particularly interested in this code because the services we offer are very diverse. I couldn't even imagine to tell you how many services we have. I mean, we're talking multiple hundreds here. But within the cloud portfolio, we have a lot of SaaS, PaaS, and IaaS offerings. So this code was the only one that addressed the full range of what we had, the highly diverse range that we had, and it also created a high bar for by fostering trust, accountability, and also giving transparency to our customers. For our obligations as a cloud provider under the GDPR. So one of the things which is very important here is, whilst all organizations have to, comply with the GDPR, it's not easy to adhere to it. Fabrizio said, you can say that you have ISO 27001 or you have SOC or you have any other standards. You can't say you really adhere to GDPR. It's not really a compliant. That's there was no certificate at that time. So what we did, we tried to strive to go beyond the minimum requirements and capture the spirit of GDPR to the most that we could. With very, we could have standards and controls that we could sort of match up, and then the cloud provider could say that that they're at the top of the game and could have a degree of confidence. So what we really basically did within this code is we created sort of the GDPR implementation of in the cloud, and then this led to the controls catalog. Funnily enough, it was actually initially adapted from a internal IBM methodology that I created within my organization to map against laws, standards, and regulations that I was coming across. It was basically a mapping of all the controls internally that we used to have, operational processes, versus the ISO standards or SOC or whatever it would be, or anything else that would come up as a regulation. It was a pretty complex sort of catalog. But then when Scope saw it, and they actually liked it, so what we did is we brought it into the EU Cloud Code of Conduct. What it basically does, it gives organizations the ability to process and document against all their contractual provisions, external ones, like I said, the industry record standards, such as 27001, the provisions of the code, especially the controls of the code as well, because the code has provisions, it has mandatory controls, and it has sort of descriptions as well, and also finally against the GDPR, of course. So one other fact on the controls catalog is that it's not restricted to any particular cloud model, tenancy model, which is a great thing. It factors in sort of many deployment models such as SaaS, IaaS, PaaS. So it's quite wide ranging. You know, just to give you an example, you know, you have a software as a service provider that does not host the platform on its own data center. So it gives you that variance, you know, that somebody else could be hosting it somewhere else, and that, you know, you have got to give evidence of the ability to show that who's hosting and we maybe have a certificate for that hoster. During one of the things that when we did the controls catalog and also the code, we used to, like I mentioned, we used to have so many experts giving every single opinion and ideas you know, to us. So this made it a really good robust code, and the implementation guidance was very strong. So it gave you many examples of how you could implement the code and the controls within your sort of organization to comply, not just with the GDPR, but also with the code as well. Recently, you know, actually, quite often we go through a review process, you know, within IBM, and we update our procedures and policies. So we were doing that recently, and one of the things that was really beneficial to me is the catalog gave me sort of an added tool to assess that. And you know, we've got hundreds of lawyers, 100 privacy people to do all this all the time, but it was just another way of basically validating what we had already implemented, which is a great, amazing tool that we use. One of the things that we're doing now, as I mentioned, we've got a lot of services, and you know, we previously declared under the old directive, but we're going through the process now of selecting which services to declare under the new version of the code, which has now been approved. So that's going to happen very soon. We also feel that, you know, by having this with like the other companies have had, it gives so much transparency to our obligations to our customers under the as a processor under the GDPR. Just finally, to close my session, I think, you know, we really want to work further with you guys. We want to work all these new initiatives that come along, such as the data transfer module, and I look forward to working further. Back to the host.
Thank you, Alkesh. Yes, actually, that's the perfect kickstart to our Q&A, because our first question from José Belo is, how does the EU Cloud CoC answers the questions regarding Schrems 2 and the Cloud Act? I need to tell José, first of all, you need to hang on a little bit longer, because right after this, we will have a third workshop who will specifically discuss third country data transfers and the third country module initiative, which is connected to the EU Cloud CoC. So hang on just a little bit longer. So let's stay with the Cloud Act, and somebody volunteers to start this Q&A. Frank? I cannot hear you, Frank.
There seems to be a slight delay in the unmuting. The Cloud Act, to my understanding, certainly will relate to the third country initiative on the long run. The code of conduct as of now only states that provided there will be third country transfers, and provided we understand the Cloud Act as a third country transfer, a cloud service provider needs to have in place the safeguards as existent, but the code itself will not act as a safeguard as such. For that, there will be the on top module and the third country initiative, and I keep it short in that regard because you mentioned it. I would just recommend to stay online and take the next session.
Yes, all right. Thank you, Frank. All right. So another question that perhaps you also can tackle here is, does a monitoring body have to be involved in the development of a code of conduct from the beginning?
I think that's something we can play back and forth with Antoine. Our understanding is they should. The guidelines originally indicated it might be considered critical if monitoring bodies are involved in the drafting, but I think we heard a lot of statements throughout also this panel that the involvement and the cooperative dialogue between the different stakeholders will certainly help to get the understanding of the sector that is needed to perform a proper monitoring in the end. So we at Scope Europe consider the involvement in the drafting not mandatory, but highly recommended, also to make sure that the drafting happens with a concept that we like to call monitoring by design. Because I think that's also something that Alkesh and Fabrizio mentioned. The code of conduct now, for example, does have the controls. And by that, it is highly verifiable and highly auditable. And by that, it creates monitoring results that are comparable within each other. And by that, it only will become the trust booster as it is envisaged to become. So from our perspective, it should, but it's not mandatory. But likely, I think Antoine might have a supervisory authority's take on that one as well.
Yeah, thanks, Frank. Yeah, I'll just agree. I think it's not a mandatory requirement, certainly not a legal requirement, but it really helps simply because also for the accreditation of the monitoring body, because the monitoring body has been involved from the beginning, knows the process, and has the controls in place to monitor those processes. So I know of other codes which have chosen a different way, and they use external monitoring body which were not involved. I think it could also be perfectly fine. I'm just curious to see how basically they're gonna develop the mechanism to basically monitor the provision. I think it's gonna be harder to develop that once the code is finalized rather than from the start.
Right, that brings me to another question. I know you guys already discussed the process more deeply, but what about the overlaps between the approval and the accreditation? Could you give us some insights in that regard?
If I can take this one, yeah. I mean, overlap. We've agreed with the other authorities that basically no code of conduct would be operational without the monitoring body. That's the added value of GDPR codes of conduct, transnational GDPR codes of conduct. So basically, I mean, there's no point in having an approved code without an accredited monitoring body, because then your code would not be operational. So I mean, we've decided at the Belgian DPA to do both at the same time, and because we wanted the code effective from day one.
All right. So there is another question, and then I go to the CSPs now, regarding what are the key legal benefits of codes of conduct and compared to other available solutions in the market, and what is the big difference between bigger cloud service providers providing more services compared to SMEs, and this has been tackled throughout the day, I know, but it's always good to have another insight. So I leave it to Fabrizio and Alkesh.
Do you want to take this on first? I'll quickly just state that one of the things that, you know, when you declare adherence to this, you know, you state it in your contract framework pack, right? So you bring it into the contracts, and basically you're telling the customer that they have that assurance now that, you know, the cloud company adheres to the EU Cloud Code of Conduct, and it's going to put in the measures that the controls that are available there. Right, so that's an additional benefit there, and that's kind of what you mean by legal. So that kind of becomes that legal framework, basically, so the contractual framework. So that's where it really benefits there. In terms of small and medium, and I'm sorry, Fabrizio, if you want to answer as well, but small, medium, large enterprises. For IBM, it's a little bit more difficult, like I mentioned before, because we have so many services and offerings. But because this code is so flexible and diverse within that, you know, how it works and how it kind of fits in. It fits in all sectors, in my opinion. So, Fabrizio.
Yeah, I totally agree. On top of that, I think you touched on that when you submit your declaration of adherence, your application, the first thing you have to do as a CSP is to decide the scope. So it may be that you, like, I can imagine massive companies or even small companies, I mean, they can really carve out what's the service and the scope they want to apply for. And the second thing, if I can try to give a different, slightly different interpretation to the legal part of the question, I think probably what the person wanted meant to ask is, what's the difference? How legal binding is the code in respect to some other certification, I guess. I think I've touched a bit on that previously. In my opinion, the code of conduct doesn't have any peer on the market. I mean, it's there are many other certifications or reports or standards. I've mentioned some of them before, and I personally also use them as a DPO to track GDPR requirements. But they are all really good. They are all valid from different point of views. They do not have, though, a public stamp on it. So there is nothing like a code of conduct that has been literally approved by all the authorities in Europe, and that said the same day, this is the code that we're going to use to evaluate if a company is compliant or not while providing cloud services. So there is nothing like it on the market. So I think from a legal point of view, again, it has a seal that other certification don't. So it's really important. And from our end, we follow the same path. We choose the scope for our certification. We went through it, and now it gives us a big reassurance, and to us and also to our customers. But I have to be honest, even before the approval, it was so well drafted, and it went through, probably because it went through such a long process, that it was already 75% approved, sort of. Even if it's legally, it's what I'm saying, it's of course is not correct, but because it has been in the air and back and forth with so many authorities, even only that fact was a reassurance for customers that, well, actually this code is well known in Europe and didn't have so much bad feedback, and actually now it's approved. So this is probably my personal or Workday point of view on the question.
No, that's the perfect closing argument. Yeah, we are reaching our time limit here. So I would like to thank you guys once again for joining us. Thank you, Fabrizio, Alkesh, Antoine, and Frank. And make sure you follow the next workshop, the final one, workshop 3, to discuss international data transfers. Very briefly, we have only barely a 10-minute break. So I see you guys very, very soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Gabriel.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.